reality is something I get into in the paranormal. Is essentially it's just a bunch of frequencies. It's just a bunch of atoms, a bunch of vibrating atoms emitting a particular frequency.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Conspiracy Folklore Corner of Melissa Dawn Eclectic. I am talking today to my guest, Kieran Woodhouse. We did a show on X Spaces, which I encourage you to go and follow me on X because I'm going to be doing a lot of weekly shows there. It's really great. We talk about the nature of reality and how the globalists use all their tools to manipulate us and manipulate our thoughts so we follow along with their devious plots. Now, Kieran is formerly an author who writes a lot about the paranormal, and out of that, he has really gotten into this way that our mind is controlled and how we perceive things. And he goes into that in this interview, so I won't chat too much longer on that, but please follow me over on X. It's at Make70s Great. I'll put the link to that in the description because we also have people who will chime in. I usually let people chime in at about the hour mark, and you can chime in and give your opinion or comment or add something to our discussion. That's what I like about Spaces. So, and we do have a guest that does that during this show. I'd like to build up an audience there, so I'm trying to go for every Wednesday to have a guest on. Kieran was this week's guest, and next week I have UFO extraordinaire researcher Dean Bertram coming on, and we're going to be talking about the whole conspiracy about the government using UFOs as sort of a lockdown, almost like they did with COVID. Will they use UFOs and aliens for that? I don't know. We're going to be talking about that next week, but it's going to be a live stream because Dean is a smart man. He got rid of all of his mobile devices, so we're going to be streaming it with Restream, but you'll still be able to comment. There won't be the discussion, but normally I want to do a Spaces where people can join in the discussion. It just adds so much more dimension, and you'll hear that on this podcast. So please follow me over at X and go to my website, melissadoneclectic.com, for all of my links. I will put all those links, of course, in the show notes. Now let's get to it and enjoy this week's topic on how these elites are controlling our reality, what is reality, and how they control us and get us to do exactly what they want so they can have their authoritarian, devious outcome. I'm good. How is everything in jolly old England?
Wet. Very, very wet.
Oh.
I know. It's been probably the worst summer I can remember, to be honest. And it's only going to get worse as we move towards autumn and winter.
Global warming, right?
Yeah, that's it. I've kind of sat here watching all of this, these supposed wildfires over in Europe, thinking, send some our way, because it's been freezing and wet most of the summer.
Well, the ones up in Canada are arson for sure.
Yeah,
all those wildfires, totally arson. I mean,
yeah,
it's so insane and we're going to talk about this crazy stuff and how we're manipulated to believe this narrative and how actually evil reality really is, and it's kind of scary.
Yeah, I think the manipulation thing has kind of stepped up to a new level the past few years. They've kind of gone into overdrive with it. And worryingly, a lot of people have fallen for it. I guess that's the worrying sign, really. That they could do it all again, and I think they would still fall for it.
Just give everybody a little bit of a mini background about what you're up to and who you are and the books you've written.
Sure. So obviously, when we've spoken before, it's been more about the paranormal, which has been my field of research. So those are the type of books that I've written about. Ghosts and the paranormal, and I've always tried to tie it into the nature of reality, because that was really the angle that I was coming from. I never really meant to fall into the world of the paranormal. I was always interested in UFOs. I was always interested in conspiracy theories. Back to 9/11 was really the first thing that I ever really started to look into, and that was about 15 or so years ago. And then, I started to attend these groups that we have in England. I'm sure that they happen, over in America as well. But there's UFO groups or there's conspiracy groups that you can go, and they have different talkers on every month or whatever. And I kind of fell in with that crowd, which was great because it broadened my horizons and helped me to talk to people who were on the same wavelength as me. So I didn't feel like I was so crazy. And then I had like a very, very up close UFO encounter in about 2012, and that, in a weird way, opened a door. It was synchronicity at its finest, and then a lot of stuff happened that basically resulted in me giving a lecture about the paranormal, a presentation about the paranormal, and someone said, "Have you not written a book? You should write a book." So I did, and then, as you know, one thing leads to another, and then I've written 2 books, done a documentary on a ghost, on a haunting in a house that we investigated. Currently in the very early stages of working on another documentary now. Very early stages with that. So I am still in the world of the paranormal, but I've always had one eye on conspiracies. And to be honest, I don't think they're a million miles apart. I think all of this is connected if you look close enough. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. Although the most recent presentation that I plan on giving is actually almost going against conspiracies, because that's how I feel at the moment. Being in the truther, and I hate that word, but in the truther environment, community for so long, I'm starting to see cracks within that, and I'm starting to see hypocrisy within that as well, and it's actually beginning to wind me up, and to the point where it's like, actually, well, who can you trust and who can you believe? And just like with ghost hunting, my circle became smaller, my equipment bag became smaller. I realised that I could only really trust myself, as opposed to all of these fancy gadgets that they try to sell you. And I think it's becoming the same in the world of conspiracies. I think I can only really trust myself and my own instinct.
Well, it's always a good thing to sit down and do a self-analysis of yourself to make sure you're not just going crazy. So whether it doesn't matter what you're looking at, whether you're looking at conspiracy or, it's always good to sit down and say, okay, am I, am I projecting something out, or is this really happening, or what's going on here? I think it's fine to criticize any kind of conspiracy in a fair way. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, please carry on.
I was just going to say, you said 9/11, and that's when I really started getting suspicious, because I was actually traveling and flying during 9/11 and got held over, and I remember thinking something's not right. And I kind of went back and forth, because you got to live life, and you've got to survive in this reality. But definitely the pandemic pushed right over the edge, where I was like, okay, this whole entire reality, is it like, what is going on here? What's the reality? Because I started to realize all these narratives are just falling apart right before my eyes, and the only people who believe it are people who are scared.
Yeah, I mean, the pandemic seemed to wake, again, it's not a term I really like, but it seemed to wake a lot of people up. And the example I give for that is my dad. So I spent years arguing with my dad about conspiracies. He thought I was a nutcase. He would laugh at my my David Icke book that I would probably have at the end of my bed. He would stand up for the national anthem if we went to watch a rugby game. All of this stuff. And the second COVID happened, he completely changed, and it was because he could no longer go to watch the rugby or the football. He couldn't go to the pub for a pint because it was directly affecting him. He woke up. Just because it wasn't happening to someone thousands of miles away, and unfortunately, that's what it took for a lot of people for it to directly impact their lives. And so we saw a lot. I say that COVID is some people's 9/11. In that it's been responsible for waking them up and for them seeing. The problem is, with again using my dad as the example, is I'm about 15 or so years ahead of him. So he's now sending me things that I've kind of looked into. I've got an opinion on already, that kind of thing. And to be frank, I'm a bit bored with a bit. It's kind of, and he's getting angry with me now because there's this kind of. If you could do a chart or a graph of waking up, you have these different stages, don't you? Where I imagine at first you're in total shock, then you have this kind of depression where you're sad that the world isn't how you thought it was. Then you start to get angry that no one else can see what you can see, and they don't share your beliefs, and they're not reacting how you want them to react. And then eventually, I think you end up being like me, where you can't. You're in prison. You know you're in a prison planet, but you just have to make yourself as comfortable as possible. And my dad is at that angry phase at the moment, and he actually. So we still argue. Ironically, we still argue because now he's upset that I don't get as outwardly upset. Yeah. Basically, yeah. He's saying, why aren't you angry about this? And I'm like, well, I am, and I was like 10 years ago. But it's not that I've come to accept it, and I understand that this could come across as someone that has just rolled over and accepts it, but I haven't. I still go on protests, I still do what I can, but I've begun to learn that there's a different way to tackle the system, and it isn't by screaming in people's faces.
So we're talking about how globalists manipulate reality, and I don't know if we can get into what reality really is. Like,
yeah,
I probably there's going to be a lot of David Icke here, and I'm listening to one of his audiobooks. Me and my husband have been, and it's really fascinating even what he thinks of the paranormal and how there's like a construct. Like it's hard to explain in like an hour and a half spaces. But what is, like, we got to kind of parse out what reality really is, so we can tell you how they're manipulating it, right?
Absolutely. And the key to all of this is, if you understand how reality works, and if you understand how our reality is constructed, then it makes it a lot easier to manipulate. If you don't have an understanding of it, then it's difficult to play the game. So the people that really run the world, the elites, again, people call them the Illuminati or whatever, but I don't really like that term. But they understand how the world works, and they understand how it operates, and so therefore they can play the game. No, but it's almost like Minecraft. They can not only play the game, but they can create a reality within it. And we all have that power. We all have that power to create our own reality, but we're taught that we don't, and we're kept in a state where we don't realise that we have that power. So, I mean, reality is something I get into in the paranormal. Is essentially it's just a bunch of frequencies. It's just a bunch of atoms, a bunch of vibrating atoms emitting a particular frequency, and we just kind of take that frequency and we regurgitate it within our brains, and then we create this reality that we can see. So,
are we doing that by our thoughts and the way that we think?
The more I've looked into this, the more I believe yes. I mean, if you wake up having am I allowed to swear?
Absolutely, go ahead.
If you wake up having a shitty day, then you will have a shitty day. If you convince yourself that the rain is going to piss you off, that it's ruined your day, then it will ruin your day. But if you convince yourself, well, actually the rain's not going to ruin my day, and I'm going to go out and I'm going to have a good time, I'm just going to get a bit wet, then you will have a fantastic day. So it's all in the perception, it's all in how you perceive the world, and the energy that you give out is the energy that you get back. And I want to get into this a bit with conspiracies, but in terms of the paranormal, the more I've researched the paranormal, the more I'm beginning to realise, in my opinion, because it is just a theory, that a lot of hauntings are actually created within the mind of the experiencer. And the experiences that they have, the energies that they create, which are real. I'm not saying that the energies, these entities that are in people's homes or whatever, aren't real, but they are manifested and created by the people that are having those experiences. And the research that I've done has led me to firmly believe this now. In terms of conspiracies, I think, just to give an example, at the moment in England, I'm not so sure about where you are, but in England we're not quite being bombarded, because at the moment they're still, we still have our climate change decorations up, but you can sense that they're going to move on to something like another COVID wave, just as we move into autumn and the flu season picks up, and they're going to start trying the COVID thing again. And again, the truther movement, or someone calls it the truther industrial complex, have picked up on this. And supposedly, if you were to be on my social media feed every day, I'm being bombarded with a lockdown is coming. The 23rd of September is a big day. We're all going to be locked down. We're all going to be wearing masks again. They're going to mandate vaccines. And yet, whilst I don't actually watch the news very much, I do keep half an eye on it. I've probably seen like 3 serious news articles in the past month mentioning something about COVID. So I'm not really getting the sense of it from the mainstream media or the governments, but I'm actually getting the fear from the truther movement. They're the ones they're the ones that are spreading this. They're the ones that are spreading the fear. And ironically, they're the ones that oppose this. They're the ones that say that this is not what we want. We want to live in harmony. We want to live in peace.
If it's in your Facebook or something like that, my guess is also the algorithm is reading you and giving you some stuff that you interact with and giving you more of it. So the mainstream media right now, they're focused on elections. Like you've seen Russell Brand. Yeah. They're highly focusing on getting rid of different media outlets that have big followings. Yeah. Probably even more so than COVID. Like they're really focused on that right now. I'm sure as it revs up, like they're talking about lockdowns, and Biden has been ordering stuff. I mean, it's happening around here slowly. People are more wearing their masks, so it is happening. But I think a lot of truther groups are jumping on it because they want people to be ready for anything.
There is that, and I appreciate that. But the point I'm trying to make is that they're inadvertently, whether they mean to or not, but they're creating this reality themselves.
Right, because their thoughts create their reality.
Precisely, exactly. And so, for example, I mean, I was in Spain last week. We went on a family holiday, and I think I saw one person at the airport, both there and here, in a mask, just one person. And that's fine. If they want to wear a mask, fine. But other people would see that one person and it would become like this big thing, and they'd be straight onto Facebook saying, I saw a person wearing a mask in the airport, can't believe these idiots, blah, blah, blah. So they end up being fixated on this one person, not realising that it was like 0.1% of all the people they've interacted with over that week.
Right.
And so what my point is that they're creating this reality and they're living on this frequency of fear despite not meaning to.
Right. So in order to change what's happening, that was my next question. I was going to say, are there different levels of frequency, and what frequencies are, manipulative elites like functioning on, right? Like there's got to be different ones.
Well, I mean, there is. I mean, from a spiritual side of things, people talk about, chakras and operating on a higher or lower frequency range. But I think the word frequency has kind of lost its original meaning. I think it's used very ambiguously nowadays. Yes. So when I talk about that kind of thing, I really mean reality. And so for me, I've got a friend who was part of the truther movement. He still is to a degree. He used to go to all of these meetings that we spoke about. He was at all the protests for COVID. But he's really, over the past year, stepped away from it. He spends a lot of time wild camping in the forest. He spends a lot of time kind of meditating and all of that. And the way he is now is he's not picking sides. He's kind of above it. He's in a different reality. And the messages that he's trying to put across to people is, whether you're, let's take Russell Brand, whether you're for Russell Brand or against Russell Brand, you're participating in the game. You're playing the game that they want you to play in, which is the game of division and duality. And that's what they need. They need you to play the game, because then you're giving energy. And, the irony of people putting out messages like, I will not wear masks, you will not mandate vaccines on me. Well, that's fine, but you're still playing the game, you're still picking a side, and you're still giving the topic or the subject your energy. And what this guy is saying is we need to just be above it. And as far as he's concerned, it just doesn't exist in his reality anymore. And that's kind of the way I've gone over the past 6 months, 8 months. I've started to lean more towards this way of thinking, because it's tiresome, Melissa. I'm sure you know yourself. It's tiresome constantly.
I think that's the point, is to exhaust us.
Exactly. And always arguing with people online, that people you'll never meet, keyboard warriors, people that have a different opinion to you. Why do we do it? If someone wants to wear a mask, crack on, please, carry on. If someone wants to get vaccinated, carry on. That's not my choice, that's your choice. As long as you're not forcing it on me and ramming it down my throat. And
I think the reason that people do it, and it's about numbers, it's about information and having people understand it. So, like, from my perspective, I totally get what you're saying, and I agree that you project your own reality out. But so many people are manipulated, and if they have the right level of numbers, it expands and expands into their advantage. And I think people think that if they counteract the information, right, and they put that out there and they keep putting that out there, they'll get to people, and people will start thinking in a different way to counteract the elite's power, because it's all about how many people you have pushing their energy towards your purpose. But they, like you said, they might be unwittingly playing this game of both sides, when a lot of times we know the elites fund both sides of the game anyways.
Yeah. But they always back both teams, that was most famously done by Rothschild during the Battle of Waterloo, when he told everybody that Wellington had lost, so everybody sold their stocks, and then it came out that Wellington had won, and he'd already brought the stocks at a good
Lord, he's like a George Soros.
Yeah, pretty much.
Maybe that's where Soros learned it from.
A 19th century George Soros, yeah. But I mean, really, the people that I get it, I understand, because I've beaten there, and to a degree, I still play the game, trying to wake people up. But again, to use the paranormal as an example, there's a point where you just stop showing people evidence, because what's the point? Because they either believe in ghosts, so they don't need to see the evidence, or they don't believe in ghosts, they never will, and it doesn't matter what you show them, they will tell you that it's Photoshop or CGI or whatever.
Right.
And they will never believe in ghosts. So there comes a point where you just don't bother, and actually you just collect the evidence for your own use, to for your own scrapbook or whatever.
I think why people are bothering on this is because they really see it as their own country's sovereignty and their freedom versus a globalist, tyrannical, psychopathic group that's going to control every element of their life.
But Melissa,
they see it as a really dire circumstance, right?
Absolutely. I mean, my son was pretty much born slightly before COVID started, so the stuff that he spent, he's probably spent half his life in some kind of restriction or lockdown, and I feel sorry for the children whose parents followed the rules and wore masks and all that kind of stuff. What a horrible existence that would be. But the last 3 years, right? If somebody hasn't woken up in the last 3 years, are they ever going to? Yeah, exactly. And
maybe they will on the way to the gulag. I don't know. I don't know when they'll ever wake up.
And that's my point. So what is the point? What is the point in screaming from the rooftops? Because you're either going to be talking to people who are with you, they're on your side, or they're going to be calling you a nutter, and they're never going to change their mind. So there comes a point where you need to stop wasting your energy on those people and directing your energy towards something better. Now, I'm talking about something like just making sure that your friends and your family are happy, making sure that your own circle are good, they're looked after. Maybe starting a community, starting a community garden or a community allotment. All this stuff you could put your energy towards. Instead of arguing. And in a way, by doing that, you are resisting and you are, sticking your fingers up to the system, because they don't want you to grow your own vegetables. They don't want you to love your neighbour. They don't want you to be friends with people of a different race. So there's different ways of, telling the government or the system, there's different ways of telling them to swivel. And it doesn't always involve arguing on Facebook at 3 o'clock in the morning, going on protests, promoting violence. There's different ways of doing, and all I'm saying is that I think it's time that we started to look at those different ways.
Well, and I was reading, I don't have the document right up here in front of me, but I had an article on Twitter, and I'm not going to go look at it now, but it was talking about in order to defeat a totalitarian system, you have to move away from reliance on it. You have to take everything away from it and start forming your own communities and using it's actually happening here in the United States, where there's like a parallel economy and groups organizing outside of this system. And the banking system is the big one, right? It's so colossal and insane and such a monster that people are trying to form their own system outside of this so they don't rely on it. That way, the more people that do that in their little systems, this tyrannical global system starts to erode and collapse.
Yeah, and that's a better form than standing outside a bank and throwing a brick through the window. Because, they almost want violence. They want you to protest. They want you to play the game. If you protest violently, if you play the game, then it justifies them bringing in more of a military-style police force, which they have over the years. It justifies them getting a bit more hands-on with you. So there are many non-violent, non-physical ways of not complying. So throughout lockdown, yes, I went on some protests, mainly just to get the vibe and to see what it was like. And yes, many of them turned out violent, and I was never part of that. But what did I do during lockdowns? Well, I hopped over the park that the council padlocked to stop my 1-year-old son being able to go on the swings and on the slide. They had padlocked the local playground. So I jumped over the fence and played on the playground with my son. I shouldn't have met with friends, but they came round and we had a nice meal together in our kitchen, and that was breaking the rules, supposedly.
It's so insane to think that that's breaking the rules.
I know. Coming around our house for a curry or something, and but we had a laugh. We put some music on and made it feel like we were actually in an Indian restaurant, to make it feel like we were actually out. But I saw who I wanted to see when I wanted to see them, and bar being able to watch sport live or go to a pub, I pretty much did everything that I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. And in my mind, that was non-compliance. I didn't play the game. I didn't have a vaccine. I didn't wear a mask. I didn't clap the NHS every Thursday night like a sea lion, like most of the neighbourhood did. I just didn't play the game. And it was around that time that I began to realise, there's better ways of doing this, because you become consumed. You become consumed with it, and I'd rather put my energy. So, for example, I created a group after lockdown, so we now meet once a month above a pub. We have different speakers on. We had a guy come and talk about ancient aliens on Monday. So we have people come and talk about. We've got a guy coming to talk about Princess Diana and Jack the Ripper. He believes there's some connection there. I'm not quite sure what that is, but
that's awesome.
I know. I called him up to book him, and I said, I've heard about this talk that you do about Princess Diana and Jack the Ripper. Is that one talk? And he said, yes. And I was like, wow, I want you to do that talk, because I need to know what that connection is. So yeah, and it's great. We have people that we probably get about 30 or 40 people come to watch. I've made some really good friends. we have a chat, we hug each other. It's just, and so I feel like I've created that little community there, you know. And whereas some people it's called an echo chamber, and people are stuck in it. They're going round in circles. They listen to people who are only telling them what they already know. They watch programs that are only telling them what they already know. They're not expanding their mind or their consciousness. And whilst they rally against those that are still wearing masks, still going for their 25th vaccine or whatever we're on now, they're just as bad because they're still trapped in that as well. And,
right.
and yet they can't see it.
So I wanted to get into, because we've talked about reality is what we kind of make it, and we've also discussed like how they want to control the way we think. And that's the point of media and news. And was there like, because news never seemed to be so devious when I was younger. Maybe I wasn't paying attention. Maybe it always was. Maybe it was just really subtle. But it seems to be like the control, the prison planet's locking down. There's like a crazier control system going on.
Yeah. Well, and you know, like I kind of mentioned at the start, they accelerated it, didn't they? You know, everyone was, you know, this is David Icke calls it the totalitarian tiptoe, and you know, we can't go from A to Z because everybody will sit up and ask what's going on. So they do it slowly, but it seemed over the last 3 years they just basically went from A to Z like super fast.
I think we have Donald Trump to thank for that because he put a wrench in the globalist plan.
Yeah, I mean, I could partly agree with that. Yes, I think there were some characters around at the time, and I say characters because I believe that they're playing their part on the stage,
right.
who absolutely threw a wrench in the works, and they felt like they had to accelerate. They couldn't carry on at the slow rate they were going. So, and
well,
again,
I think it's their own fear. I think they panicked.
Yeah, absolutely. Because
they're still panicking because Klaus Schwab is getting really nervous.
They're still. I mean, I wanted to get onto Klaus Schwab at some point,
okay,
but the whole kind of going from A to Z practically overnight, with pretty much every country in the world being in lockstep, which was a dead giveaway as to what their agenda was. I think every time world leaders are in lockstep with a particular policy, then you need to question what's going on.
Same thing with the journalism when they all
yes.
spew out the same headlines. You know that's not real journalism.
Absolutely. I mean, again, just to go back to Russell Brand. I mean, I watch Russell Brand. I quite like Russell Brand. Is he a shill? Is he an insider? To be quite frank, I don't really care. I know of some people who have woken up because of Russell Brand. So if he is a shill, then he's done a pretty shit job because he's been responsible for waking people up. Yeah, but people are saying they're after him, and it's just because he's played his part, and he's. I mean, some of the crazy stuff I've seen from some of these people, what they believe, and it's just madness.
I think it's really simple. I think he's got actually quite a good American audience as well, and his age range is from 20 to 40, and that's a big threat to Democrats because that's usually who votes for Democrats. I think it's really that simple.
I think I mean, let's be honest. Even by his own admission, he was a bit of a bastard when he was younger, and he had his problem. But he was always self-admitted. He never hid away from that. And to get to 6.6, by the way, apparently that's a giveaway that he's a shill. That they allowed him to get to 6.6. I know.
Whoa! So 2 months ago, when he was 6.5, he wasn't a shill.
Well, apparently it's because he happens to be at 6.6 is when they've closed his YouTube account or demonetized him or whatever.
Oh, okay, that's yeah. Okay.
I know, but this is the kind of crap that I see every day, So so for me, he had 6.6 million subscribers. I've watched that grow from when I started, kind of tuning into him. It was at like 4 point something, and that's within less than a year. So in less than a year, he's gained over 2 million subscribers on YouTube. And you're right, I read the comments, and a lot of them are from America as well. And I think he's put the fear of God into them. I think he's, there's that famous video of him now where he's on, I don't know, some late night chat show thing in America where he what's his name? That guy, is it Bill Meyer or something?
Yeah, Bill Maher. I think it was Bill Maher.
Yeah, and he comes out with these kind of facts about how COVID created billionaires from the pharmaceutical business and all of that, and things that you just cannot argue with. You cannot argue with that. Now, if he's a shill, fine, but he's still telling the truth. And just like David Icke is supposedly a shill, but David Icke is responsible for waking up millions of people. And so if he is a shill, then fine, but they can't be happy with him because
the problem with that is then you're paranoid about everybody, and you don't. Who will you listen to? I don't know that he's a shill. I think he's authentically. I would have said he was a shill when he was in Hollywood and in his high addiction and sex addiction stage, which is what they're trying to target right now. That's his weakness. And I would have called him a shill then. What we really have is we have the thing about the globalist culture we have is it's empty. It's void. It's based on consumerism. Now they want to totally control everything. And there's not a lot to it. And young people are so empty. That's why they're going. That's why over this past century, we've been going to communism. They've been going to fascism because they killed God. And now people are empty and no one's feeding them any kind of mystical, any kind of importance in the universe, any kind of community where they go to their church and they feel they belong, and they're looking for it.
Yeah. And, I think you've kind of just encapsulated the whole conversation there with one comment. That people feel like they need a purpose, they need a reason, and that manifests itself in what's become to be known as identity politics. Yeah. And I'm left and I'm right and I'm a Brexiteer and I'm an anti-Brexiteer and all of this. And what happens with identity politics is you get pigeonholed. So, for example, I voted for Brexit. I wanted us to leave the European Union. But apparently that makes me a right-wing, racist football hooligan who wants any black or brown person dead. And you couldn't be further from the truth.
Yeah. The same with all of us who are MAGA. We just want a strong country, a good community, good jobs, not all this taxes. We want all the corrupt people out of government, but now we're racist, bigots, crazy, hillbilly hicks, and the whole list.
That's exactly right. And that's identity politics for you. And, same as on the left. If you're on the left, then you're a feminist, transgender, hippie, kind of just stop oil type person. That's how they're portrayed. But I've got plenty of friends who swing towards that way, and they are none of that. They are just a normal person who just happens to have a different opinion to me, and that's great. The world needs people with different opinions. So these people, they need a purpose, and of course, the those that really run the world know this, and it's this kind of divide and conquer, and it's happened for millennia, hasn't it? You're brown and I'm white. You worship a different god to what I worship, so we need to have a fight. It's just not that black and white. The world isn't so black and white, and it's mainly grey. But if you watch the news and if you listen to the mainstream media, and again, even if you listen to the truthers, everybody's being pigeonholed depending on a particular version of their beliefs or their perception. So once they realised that we need a purpose, then it becomes easy to divide us. They give us that purpose. But again, going back to what I said previously, our purpose could be so much better. Our purpose could be to homeschool our children. Our purpose could be, one of my friends has recently started what he calls a forest school, where he has children come from schools every day of the week, and he teaches them how to forage in the woods and how to light a fire and how to camp and all of this stuff. So, and he's one of the guys that's kind of like, I don't want to be in this game anymore. I'm going to rise above it. So that's where he's putting his energy now. And how fantastic is that?
Children need that kind of education. They don't need to be educated that there's 500 unicorn genders.
100%. You think how much that's
reality?
Yeah, that's life skills that they wouldn't get taught in school. And so, just by doing something that is incredibly precious to these children, he's basically telling the system to go and fuck itself. And he's doing that without, arguing with people on Facebook, without all of this stuff that we've already been through. He's simply just not playing the game. And I genuinely believe that we could all find purpose in our lives if we did this.
Here's one question I have. So I choose, I'm not going to play the game, and I'm doing something here in America, and and I got the IRA at my door. They're armed. They're arming them. 87,000. Suddenly, the government becomes aware. Someone reports me because they see me doing it. Like that could be a possibility. And that's how it went in Nazi Germany. People reporting everybody for hiding Jewish people, or for being Jewish, or for crazy stuff like that.
Yeah, and again, that it's a possible reality. That's something that could definitely manifest itself in the future, and it's something that's manifested itself in the past, as you've just brought up there. It's difficult because part of me doesn't think that will ever happen, and I know you probably have listeners who are probably screaming now but it's going to happen. It's going to happen.
It could. It could if we let it. If we all don't wake up and stop being ridiculous and mind our own business and don't report our neighbors for something that's not really an ethical crime or against the law.
Yeah. But the way that happens is by improving your community, isn't it? And the way that happens is by having
talking to your neighbors.
Talking to your neighbors, yes, and finding some middle ground with them. I mean, since we last spoke, I've moved out to the countryside, mainly just to get away from people. So I now live in a little village, but the community is fantastic. It is brilliant, and they're mainly conservative voters. They're mainly kind of stuck up, as in posh and a bit kind of. I guess they are racist to a degree, some of them, because they live out in the country and they're not really used to a multicultural society.
I don't know that makes them racist.
Some of the things I've heard in the pub, Melissa.
Okay. Right.
But yeah, I mean, my neighbours, I've got neighbours, and they are two of the best people I have ever met. And they, I mow the lawn for them when I'm cutting my grass. They bring me bread from the local market. And you just think, how brilliant is that? Yet where I lived before, your neighbour wouldn't piss on you if you were on fire.
Well, and I think that actually highlights where the center of the problems are. It's in these sort of global, massive urban cities where a lot of these big corporations are pumping stuff out. And a lot of people don't realize that they go, you're a Nazi, this a Nazi. You can't get more Nazi than a corporation and a government tied together. That is literally the definition of fascism, is when a corporation literally incorporates the government and they're working together to do mass control.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. And you're right, it's the people that are essentially living in the rat race. And the system has you having to live in the rat race. One of my arguments my dad used to have with me before he kind of woke up was, well, if you stop playing the game, you'll find yourself waking up in a shop doorway, because if you quit your job, how are you going to pay your rent or your mortgage? And if you can't pay your mortgage, you get kicked out of your house. If you get kicked out of your house, you're homeless and you're sleeping in a shop doorway. So to a degree, you have to still play the game.
Right.
And he's absolutely right. Of course he is. But like I've already said, there are certain ways you can rebel. And just kind of going back to this community that I've kind of found myself living in now. They all help each other. We have a yearly village pantomime that everybody participates in. We have village fetes that everybody goes to. And there are people that don't have the same opinions. I mean, we had a jubilee party for the Queen in the village hall, and the lady that was organising it is a pure stout Republican. And I said to her, well, why are you doing it then? And she said, well, no one else will, and the village needs a party. And it's like, how good is that?
Yeah.
She stepped up for the sake of making sure that the community had a good day, And I mean, I didn't sing the national anthem, but I went along because there was free cake and free alcohol. But yeah, it's one of those where that I just couldn't see that happening in other areas, where, well, no, I don't agree with that, and I'm not going to do it. And I just feel like we need to move away from identity politics. We need to realise that we're all one consciousness, and there are so much better things you could be doing with your time and your energy, that could benefit yourself, your family, and your community. And to me, that's what matters now. Like, not being divided. What matters is coming together and putting those differences to one side. In fact, embracing those differences, allowing, you could learn something from someone that might have a different opinion to you. If you could allow yourself to be open-minded, you could learn something. And I found this in the paranormal and the UFO world. Just because someone doesn't agree with my theory, or I don't agree with their theory, they might have a particular puzzle piece that fits mine if I sit and listen to them. But we're in the mindset where we don't even bother sitting and listening to them. We just ignore them, or we have an argument with them. And I feel we should be sitting and listening.
So, like, with when I'm going to use David Icke as a reference because he's one of the, he's one of the first, one of the earliest who was calling out a lot of this. And he's talking about thought frequencies and feelings. And I always got the sense that the elites that are manipulating us, it's thoughts, but the frequencies is about feelings. And they want us in the fear, isolated and afraid, that frequency. That's where the controlling happens. That's where you get crazy and you do crazy things and you're allowed to be controlled. But David Icke talks about something a little more even spookier and creepier, which is almost that they're demonic. They come from some other place. How do you feel about that? How do you feel about that kind of notion?
Well, I agree with it to an extent. So he talks about I think he calls them the archons, and it's essentially these reptilian overlords that people often cite that he talks about. The way he explains it, very briefly, for those that aren't aware, he discusses how they operate on an alternate frequency, and they feed off our frequency. They feed off the negative energy, the lower vibrational energy, and that is created by war and famine and fear and disease and everything that kind of keeps you sat at home scared about living. They feed off that, and because they can't directly come into this reality, they can't vibrate on this frequency, they use certain people within our reality, in order to carry out their deeds. And those people are, he calls them basically a particular bloodline, so the royal family or the Rothschilds or whoever. And the reason that these families interbreed is because they need to keep that blood pure, because that's what enables these entities to come in and interact within our world through them. And if the bloodline dilutes too much, then they will lose that ability to have these people, these entities, use them. And of course, in exchange for being used, they get given wealth and power and whatnot in the world. Now, is that true? I don't know. Is it a metaphor? Possibly. What worries me is there are people in positions of power that do believe in these entities. This kind of satanic, ritualistic environment that we see politicians involved in, that we see Hollywood involved in, that we see the music industry. They always have these kind of symbols, these hand gestures, these lyrics, these words. They obviously worship some kind of entity, some kind of negative entity, be that reptilian, Satan, Lucifer, whatever. They worship something. Whether that entity is actually real or not, in my mind, doesn't matter. What matters is that these people believe that it's real.
Yeah, well, they could create it.
Well, oh, yes, I mean, if we go back to what we spoke about with the manifesting of the hauntings, absolutely. But what these people do in the name of this entity that they believe exists, that's the scary part, isn't it? Because whether the entity exists or not, so, whether, I don't know, a serial killer, whether a serial killer actually hurt someone in his head or not, it doesn't matter. What matters is he thought he did, and he went out and killed a bunch of people. And it's the same here. Whether this entity exists or not doesn't matter. It's the fact that these people in positions of power or fame or whatever, they do believe it, and it's what they're willing to do in order to honour that belief.
Well, and what's interesting is, and I think this the reason it's gone out of control is because most people have not listened to the Bible, and even some Christians is. And I'm a graphic designer, so when I heard this, I heard Jordan Peterson talking about this, is that you're not supposed to worship an icon or a logo. And these companies, they have these creepy, they have their stuff branded everywhere, but people don't understand there could be some kind of really bad meaning behind it, and we're wearing it all over us. And it's this idea that you're worshiping something that is not God, and that would be them, and they could have some weird ritual behind it that they believe that they're bringing something in. Maybe they are. And you'll see these phases. That's why I got out of interviewing people on the occult, because most of the people, when I ran a paranormal podcast, I started to realize that, okay, we can talk about this stuff, but a lot of these people I'm in with they're not well. There's something really wrong with them. And I was starting to not be well by having to research that stuff just to interview them, whether it was on Aleister Crowley or something. There's something wrong with these people, and they're really sick. And we're sitting here with their logos all over us and everywhere, and we're worshiping icons, and we're not supposed to, because that's not actually God. That's not actually whatever the energy is in the universe. I believe that stuff is actually plugging up our connection to something that's higher and better.
Absolutely. But what you've just done there, and I agree with everything that you've just said, because what you've just done there is you've, by way and large, kind of come around to the same conclusion that I've been saying throughout this whole interview, in that where these people are giving their energy to the occult, and you were feeling that it was bringing you down, that negative energy. Now, you could almost argue that we have a COVID cult at the moment. We have a conspiracy cult. We have these people that go out and they listen to their favourite truther podcaster. They go and listen to their favourite politician, or they go and pick their favourite actor to watch their films or whatever. By allowing yourself to be drawn into that energy 24/7, it's going to have a negative impact on you. And so, whether you're worshipping the occult, researching the occult, or researching conspiracies and consuming your time there, it's going to have that kind of impact. Because if you sit all day, every day, and look at things like globalization, the WEF, child trafficking, sex trafficking, paedophilia within the higher, the higher ends of society, chemtrails. If you sat and looked at this all day, every day, that would depress you.
Yeah.
And some people are there, Melissa. Some people are doing this every single day, and they end up in this echo chamber. And all I'm trying to say, just like you noticed it with your cult, and you thought, I've got to stop doing this because it's kind of, it's bringing me down.
I wasn't an occultist, but when you interview occultists multiple times a week, because it started out as folklore, but when you have these people coming on because it's popular and you start getting into it and you have to research it, I mean, it starts appearing everywhere around you. Yeah, it just comes to you.
Yeah. And I would argue it's the same with conspiracies and stuff. And of course, have an eye on it, and I still do, because you need to know what's going on in the world. You need to know how they're manipulating you. You need to know what their next move is, so you can stay one step ahead. Of course, but it doesn't mean that your whole life should be consumed by it. And as I've said a million times already on this interview, there's better ways to use your time and energy. But I'm kind of glad you've just made that point, because it's absolutely correct what you said.
It's back to Nietzsche when he says, "Look, when you stare at the abyss, it's going to stare back at you." When you hunt monsters, be careful, because it's going to look back into you and hunt
when you. when you go ghost hunting and you create your own reality, I'm sure I've said to you on a previous interview, if you want, the Virgin Mary only ever appears to people that believe in the Virgin Mary. She never appears to anyone else. And if you want to go out and find Bigfoot, you'll find evidence of Bigfoot, whether it's real or not, in your mind, you'll find evidence of Bigfoot. If you want to go out and find a ghost, you'll find evidence of a ghost. And if you want to go out and find conspiracies, you will go out and find conspiracies, Right. So just like staring into the abyss and having it stare back at you, staring into a bunch of negativity is going to bring negativity into your life. And, it's how do you deal with that? How do you kind of absorb that, the information that you need to know in order to survive, in order to, like I say, stay one step ahead of the game? How do you absorb that and not let it drown you, really?
Yeah, I think, and I had this suggested for anyone who was researching the paranormal, is you got to have balance, where, like you said, you spend some time doing that, but then you have to go out and do your gardening and spend time with your family. You have to have a balance. You can't just saturate yourself with it all the time. Now, I was listening to David Icke, and he was talking about how, I want to switch this because this is really important, because we're all locked in right now. We're talking on the internet. It's like its own little new world that's being created, and it's false. It's a fake sort of. It's not natural. It's not, it's not organic. And he's saying that there's a place where they literally collect everything on us that's replicating something that might be real, like where there's a place when you die where there's God and you have to relive everything you did or something like that. He's saying that's kind of what's happening here.
Okay,
it's like a collection of, I don't know, some people might call it some kind of archive or some kind of Jung had a name for it, collective consciousness or something, but what they're doing here on the internet is like a faux version of that. They're kind of they understand how consciousness runs and where it goes with God, and they're kind of creating like a faux, like, I don't know, collective where everything's kept on us, but it's not like a loving, forgiving God that says it's okay. You know, whatever. It's like this authoritarian, crazy people who are going to use it to abuse us.
Yeah. I mean, I think at the very lowest explanation, I think the internet is just great for mining data, isn't it? With getting people's, what do data companies, people call this kind of data, they call it gold, don't they? Because they have all of our psychoanalysis data, they all have all of our spending habits, they have all of our other habits, what we look at, what we watch, who we talk to, what we do, how long we spend doing it, what we buy. They have all of that information on us. And if that's going to be used to create some kind of, alternate reality for us,
it's almost like a soul trap. Like they're trapping us in some kind of thing, so we can never move on. I think that's what he says.
Yeah, and I can get on board with that. I mean, even to a point where it traps us because we spend so much time on it, scrolling through it mindlessly, hours on end, scrolling through social media, and so it's physically it's trapped us, hasn't it? In this world, it's kind of enslaved us.
Yeah, but the idea is like, it's, I don't know if it's mimicking a god, but it's more like maybe. Oh, we have a request. Someone's requesting. Okay. Who's requesting? All-purpose heretic. I'm going to bring someone on. They're requesting to talk. We'll bring them in. I'll say hello.
I don't really know how this works. This is all new to me.
People can request to speak, so we've talked long enough, and it's connecting with him, so hopefully he'll get on. All-purpose heretic. He's all-purpose heretic. You are in. Is there something you wanted to add to the conversation?
Ready for that, but I suppose I could.
It's okay. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, how many of you all saw the Neil Oliver "We Need a Revolution" sort of speech, and the subsequent, I guess it was something like 4 hours he did as a Spaces just after that?
I didn't. No.
Oh, you didn't? I would encourage everybody to give that a watch. It might get harder and harder to see, but. Yeah, it sort of struck a chord. It got something like 1 million views shortly after he had posted it. Now, granted, that wasn't even its original broadcast home. It's not like he went on X and just recorded a video of himself saying we need a revolution. It was actually him saying it on, I believe, Sky News. So, unfortunately for sticking his neck out, he's sort of become the face of whatever thought process we have against, insulating ourselves against this. I didn't hear any talk about banks or their role in this, which is sort of disturbing to me. I mean, it should be common knowledge. You should be able to hit somebody over the head with this stuff. And for me, one thing that just generally speaking kind of wakes people up is that I just say, how hard is it for you to get this? Government borrows but government has no money, borrows it all from a nebulous, scary bank, and sticks us with the tab. That's it. You could say it in less than 30 seconds. And when people actually, that's not true, they have this natural sort of antibody resistance to repel facts from going into their little heads wrapped around, encased in concrete, and you have to sort of make them deal with this fundamental reality. They, generally speaking, will surround themselves, go back to sleep, sit on it a couple of years, mull on it, and then it takes them a long time for them to actually get there, but they actually do get there. I was the same way.
You just parsed it out really simply, and that's exactly how it happens.
Well, I'm getting better at red pilling people. I'm not very good at it myself, to be
honest. We have this elite group of politicians that have got into control, and they take out loans, and they disperse it wherever. Most of it now isn't even helping us. It's helping whatever their global plans are, and we're stuck with the bill plus interest.
I encourage everybody to check out the Solari report and Catherine Austin Fitts, who's a former deputy secretary of HUD. And she's pointed out for years that she was brought in just to be an accountant and balance books and do boring things. And she was fascinated by the fact that nobody seemed to want their books balanced. And she'd be like, well, this is $2 billion in the red. And they'd say, well, we don't mind. I leave that alone. And so it ended up being looking into the Pentagon's black budget. It ended up being a lot of this, but there's, just a money laundering portion of this whole thing. And I don't know when for her she came about the realization that the whole thing is just a gigantic scam for, just basically these government organizations, these what we think of as arteries filled with public servants, they get something of akin to a blank check, and they're able to just perpetuate massive amounts of fraud because the usual bean counters and people that are meant to be giving oversight to this are basically being paid off to look the other way. And she has something that she says to also sort of sum up the whole thing. She says, well, basically, if I have a neighbor, right, and my neighbor is allowed to print their own money, to basically manufacture their own dollar bills, they're allowed to counterfeit. And I don't have that ability, and I'm at the behest of demand, and I need to go to work every morning, and I make a certain amount of finite money, and they just get as much as they want. It goes to show that eventually, at the end of the, whatever time it takes, they're going to own everything in town. That's the common sense. So, it's hard to reach people with this common sense. I find most people, there's a lot of people that still have heads filled with chowder.
Well, we talked about doing like an alternative sort of our parallel economy. Like, what would be the solution for that? I mean, it's so vast. It's like a big giant money laundering scheme. It's hard for people to look. I think people go back to sleep because it's hard for them to look at that and deal with it, because they're like, well, how do you solve that? Like, they don't even know how to even go about that.
Yeah, there's a movement. There's some kind of parallel economy. Oops, am I still on?
You are.
There's a parallel economy movement called I'm trying to remember, Freedom Cell Network. There's one to check out. I am not sure who the organizers are, but they have like these little cells in each locality. I mean, basically, if you're near, any major city will probably have a little freedom cell bunch of people, and they basically have these little potlucks that they try and organize. I've lost contact with mine. There used to be one local to where I am, but I don't know. I just found this sort of apathy that's kind of set in. So if everybody's interested in growing their own food, creating some kind of network where they can basically reliably trade in things like silver and stuff, this is the time to start doing it because there's not much time left.
Well, thank you very much for that. That was excellent, and it's good to just say it straight and how it's happening. And it's really devious.
Freedom Cell Network is the name of the organization. I have no idea who's involved with it or whether or not it's taking off in any particular area versus where it's not taking off, which is in my area. For what it's worth, I live near Washington, D.C. George Soros owns the building I work out of, and we pay rent to an organization that used to be sort of a spin-off, but it used to be owned by the Rothschild family.
Wow! Yeah, lucky you.
For sure.
All right, Kieran, are you still there?
Yeah, sorry, I was just getting a drink.
No problem. All right, well, that was really interesting information. I'm glad he kind of phrased it like that, because, I mean, we have to remember the government and the banks and the corporations are, this is what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, the whole point about, money and how money is created and how, the
thin air.
Out of thin air, yeah, and the fact that the banks lend money to the government mean the government are in the hands of the banks, which means the banks are the ones that really run the country. And you talk about what's an alternative economy. I mean, the problem is if we started to trade in oranges and use oranges to buy and sell things with, someone would just amass a huge amount of oranges, and you would have orange billionaires. So I think the point I'm trying to make is that it doesn't matter what kind of format you go with, eventually you will end up where we are now, because it's the system itself that is corrupt. And there's an argument that's been put forward by several people about, well, who if we get rid of these people in power, which is, let's be honest, most of our ambitions, that we don't have these governments ruling us. If we were to get rid of them, then who replaces them? Because if we were to completely topple the system, and let's use my village. Every village has someone that runs the village, So we have a guy called Nigel, and if Nigel was to leave, everyone has a problem with Nigel. He's a bit power hungry. He likes to be in control of the village, and everyone has a problem with that. And if he was to leave, I guarantee the person that next stepped into his shoes would eventually end up like Nigel.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's exactly what happened with the Russian Revolution. They got rid of one tyrant. They weren't happy with their monarchy, and some other crazy, hungry, maybe even worse, showed up. Who knows?
Yeah, and that's the thing. So I'm not saying, better the devil and we should stick with what we've got. Absolutely not. What I'm saying is that, again, as I've already mentioned, it's just not so black and white.
Yeah. Because there's always, the thing about our society is, it's supposed to be merit-based, where we can work our way up to the top based on our achievement, but you have so many psychopaths, and they'll do whatever it takes to get to the top. You've got a lot of people who are really manipulative, and they can have these megalomaniac, dark triad personalities, and they'll take everybody out, just, and when they get to a certain amount of power, they might even start off as nice people, but once they get so much power, it goes to their head, and they can turn into tyrants.
This is it. And so, as I say, whoever replaces Nigel, using him as a metaphor, will end up just like Nigel eventually. And it might not be straight away, but they will. And
do we as people, do we play a part in that? Because Nigel can't end up like Nigel, or the other guy can't. Are we interacting and allowing them, is it like a unknowing and unconscious sort of activity between the leader and the followers?
Yeah, I genuinely believe so. It's that game, isn't it? It's the game that we're talking about. These these people only have as much power than we let them. Can you imagine if they rolled out the vaccine program, for example, and every single person in England or the UK just said, "Nah, not going to bother with that. Like, it's not for me, mate. Not going to bother." What would they do? Like, yes, they could say, "Well, you're not allowed to fly, and you can't go to the football, and you can't." And we just all said, "Okay, fine, we can live with that." What would they do?
Yeah.
So,
the thing is they don't just roll out the vaccine first. They roll out a whole other shit of fear first, and then roll out the vaccine.
Of course, it's the it's the problem reaction solution, isn't it? They have to give you a reason to go and buy their product. Essentially, people don't just go and buy an iPhone. They go and buy an iPhone after months and months of marketing. It was the same with the vaccine. Months and months of marketing a virus, and here's the product. Go and buy it.
Like I was saying originally, that's where they couldn't make you move in. That's where the manipulation is in propaganda, media. That's how they motivate. That's literally like your magical spell. And he'll go. Yeah. It's in marketing. And that's kind of what I wanted to get to the core of, is what's motivating this, what's making us move. And it's almost like a spell. Like, marketing is propaganda. Propaganda is really cleverly crafted, a crafted spell to make us afraid and do things.
Well, again, as I mentioned at the start, when you know how reality works, and you know how this reality is created, and how we operate as players within that game. Once you know how all of that works, then it becomes incredibly easy to manipulate. And it's similar here. During COVID, we had what's called the 77th Brigade within the UK government, it was essentially a department of people that we used to track people's behaviour and track people's responses to how we were receiving the news and the daily shit that they were putting out about COVID, and that would then feed back to the government. Say, look, they're not really buying this new variant, or look, they're not really, they're shitting themselves with this one. Like you. So they were put there to gauge our body language, our behaviour, our reaction, and that's the same across the board. Not just with that, Christ. Adverts, like, you can't watch a TV program now without adverts constantly. You try to watch a sport game and it's just adverts. You try to watch a YouTube video and it's adverts. It's just bombarding you constantly. So imagine that marketing type campaign, but on almost a campaign for your mind, a campaign for your body, which is essentially what they've been doing.
So basically, they've been doing this over years, first with newspapers, magazines, television, movies, VCRs, VHS, now it's the internet, now it's social media. So basically, they've literally infiltrated our homes with all this technology in order to do this. And I don't want to be like some crazy lunatic sounding person, but it sounds like we have to pull it all out of our homes.
Absolutely. And if I could, I would go and live off grid. And completely disconnect from it all. But as my dad said, it's difficult. You've got to have one foot in the game if you kind of want to survive. And I've got friends that do. I've got friends that are completely and utterly off grid, and they're very happy. And if I didn't have a 3-year-old child to think about and keep warm and fed, I would probably leap at the opportunity. But so I have to find different ways to disconnect from it.
You kind of have to maneuver from it, and like we said, do it in balance. When you remember, like, you had like the witch hunts and witch burnings, witch hangings back in the day with the great witch hunt. What a lot of people don't realize is, the sort of witchfinder general type people, they were in the villages for a while trying to like convince the pastors. They were trying to do that for a long time, and it never stuck. Everyone said, get the hell out of here, you're crazy. Like, no one bought it. And you know what changed it? It's always technology. The printing press showed up, and they were able to print their fear on the pamphlets and leave the pamphlets in the villages. So even when they weren't there, their message and their propaganda was. And that's essentially what we're doing with all this technology. So even though they're not here all the time, it's still here. And the more people see that, they start getting afraid. And then it's like, that's how we know we're all connected, is once one person gets afraid, another one. And once it goes past like a 15-20%, I think that's the golden number, it just goes boom, and next thing everyone's afraid. That's exactly how mega spread or any of those things. Like it gets past a certain point, and it's like freaking compound interest. It just doesn't stop.
I think absolutely spot on. If someone just turned up into a village and started burning a woman at the stake, the whole village would go absolutely mad and say, "What the hell are you doing?" That they needed to convince these people why they were going to burn this woman at the stake.
They do that through narratives and stories, because we love stories. We see our lives in stories.
Yes, and I really want to bring this round to. That group I mentioned that I run monthly. We had a guy, please do look him up, called Carl James, and he does a lot of research into symbolism within sci-fi films, within films and music really in general, and he kind of picks out the symbolism and talks about it and stuff. And he came and did a very good presentation around the War of the Worlds broadcast. Mm-hmm. And the original one, and I think that the talk was called something like an exercise in fear, and he argued the point that, bearing in mind this was really the first time that they could reach people's homes, through the radio or whatever, and it was the first time that they could have a whole nation listening to the same story at one time, and they used it as an exercise to see how can we manipulate people's feelings, people's thoughts, people's actions. And so they sent this kind of, this was it Orson Welles, and they broadcast it into people's homes, and they told people that the world was being invaded. And then what happened subsequently after? Well, I mean, he goes into great detail about how all the people that were connected with that, the broadcasting of that, were all funded by the Rockefeller Foundation. And he some really good research there. But anyway, what happened after the broadcast was that the media started to report several million of people had committed suicides. An X amount of number of people were fleeing their homes during the broadcast because they were genuinely concerned that the world was being invaded. People were quitting their jobs. People were burning belongings. All of this stuff supposedly was happening. We
went crazy and hoarded toilet paper.
Yeah.
I did, but lots of people did.
But the point that he made, and I actually want to bring this round to COVID because he did, and it was great. The point that he made was actually statistically, with all the research that has been done since, that was a lie.
Yeah.
And the number of people that actually reacted negatively, which they wanted they basically wanted to tell everybody, we broadcast this thing and it caused mass panic. When actually the figures were substantially lower than what the media were saying. So it's almost like by convincing the media that by convincing the public that they had created panic, the public then went out and created that panic themselves. And this comes all the way back around to what I was saying near the start, where people that they plant the seeds. So look at this COVID thing, for example. Now I've seen 3 news stories roughly about it, but I'm seeing it everywhere on my social media from the Truther movement. So they've planted the seed, one little story, one little news article, and now everyone is kicking off about it, and they're now creating that reality. They're the ones creating the panic, not the media. Yeah. They're doing it themselves. So when you just mentioned toilet paper. Yes, I saw.
Nobody even told them to hoard toilet paper, but they did.
Why it was toilet, I don't know. Now, I can't speak for everyone, but not once did I ever see with my own eyes somebody hoarding toilet paper.
Oh, really? I did. I worked in Costco, though. Costco was the hub of crazy. If you worked at Costco, you did like mad. Seriously, you did. I was like, what is going on? I couldn't even figure it out.
We never had trouble getting toilet paper, to be honest. But again, how much of it is just the media spinning that, you know?
Oh, yeah.
And so the media say, oh, everyone's panicking, everyone's going out and buying toilet paper. Now, at that moment,
and everybody goes and buys toilet paper because they think there's not going to be any left.
Exactly, yes. And at that time, nobody was going out really in panic buying toilet paper. They might have just found one store where they'd sold an excessive amount of toilet paper, ran with the story, and then everybody goes out and feeds that panic themselves. And that is what the War of the Worlds broadcast did.
Wow.
And that's what it taught the powers that be. Wow, we can do this. And then the moment they moved from radio to television, and of course when newspapers weren't so local, i.e. newspapers could be shipped around the country, therefore reach
you can create even more mass panic. You
could create a more mass panic, and that's exactly what happened. And now it's the internet. And the next technology that comes along, it will be that as well.
We got all-purpose heretic. Well, they're going to link shit in our brains. I ain't getting that shit in my brains. That chips, no, not happening. All-purpose heretic would like to come on and do a little comment again, so I'm going to bring him back in. Welcome. You can now speak. Can he? Speakers?
I don't know. It just says requested on my. Oh, there you go.
Oh, he has to unmute himself. I'll make sure that I don't.
Sorry, if you were calling on me, I missed that bit.
No, go ahead.
I don't have that much to add, except that I guess. Well, I'm not going to go too much into where I work, but I mean, I do work in media, so I have seen all sorts of spin and just garbage being passed off as actual fact and truth. And one thing I can't say I know when something's true or false, but I can tell when someone's lying to me. I'm proud of my bullshit detector being rather strong, even if I can't necessarily point to the exact fact that some spinmeister and schlockmeister is trying to pass off as truth. One really handy component of this, I think everybody really needs to understand the psychological... Well, okay, let me put it this way. The psychology of the normie works something like this. Well, if that was really true, they would have told me on the news. So, they wouldn't have been able to pull anything like this off in the mid-90s when movies like Three Kings that were directly criticizing whatever role the United States played in the Gulf War, what they were really up to, and how there were just, three ridiculous guys working for the U.S. military that were trying to pull off a gold heist, for example. That movie probably wouldn't even get made under today's circumstances, because you just had to have a certain iota of critical thinking to be able to even, that it wasn't really about what you were being told, but it's really about this, had actually sort of crept into the mainstream. There's also a movie that I think has Clive Owen in it called The Continental. That's just about the role of banks causing all of this, forgive my parlance, shit that we're dealing with. Your average normie really needs to see it on the news in order to believe it. And I guess when you were just talking about the toilet paper phenomenon and the way that's snowballed, a big component of this is just high school behavior. The people around me are doing this, so I need to do it too.
Yes. Well, we're herd animals. It's biological as well.
Yes, but you can break people out of that. There's ways that you can certainly make fun of them. You can certainly ridicule them, and it helps to have. So for example, Scott Adams was saying the minute that another company decides to pull out the COVID restrictions again and start doing masks up, if it's an airline, whoever it happens to be, whoever it is that starts doing the top-down shit, like you have to do this or you're going to be fined or U.S. Marshals are going to pull you off the plane, you just basically have to decide. He said that a major company, I don't care if their intentions were actually good, I don't care if they were just, going with whatever the government said, they must be bankrupted. And they must be bankrupted so bad. It's not just a bloody nose. We want to basically... make them go down so bad that nobody else looking at them will decide to do that.
Well, and we've been manipulated in decades and decades, and I think this has been planned, to trust authority figures and trust specialists kind of figures, and that's okay if the specialist is ruling on their own behalf or they actually have a good intention, but if they're working on behalf of this totalitarian globalist, it's not okay. And that's why people are like, but the news told me. They don't understand that the news is compromised and that they're working on behalf of a sinister sort of global narrative. They're not telling you the truth. They're not factual. They point their camera somewhere, they edit, and they rewrite a story. It's probably given to them by the CIA or something. They don't get that because they've been taught since they were little in school to trust authority figures.
I think Kieran mentioned, if somebody was burning a witch in the neighborhood, presumably somebody would come to the rescue and say, hey, what the hell are you doing? Not if it's Donald Trump. Certainly, there's enough people.
Well, they've just spent years demonizing him. That's
not
why.
Just that, but I mean, okay, so I was in DC with a digital camera meant to try and get some glimpse of the motorcade or something like that for my organization when he came to DC and dealt with that. There was a crowd that assembled, as you could imagine, and had almost sort of a surreal kind of summer festival feel to it, where lots of people had congregated and lots of people were suddenly selling t-shirts and paraphernalia, and then the usual signs started to show up. But then, you had these guys with like beards and long greasy hair and stuff showing up, and they weren't really causing trouble, but they were there. Clearly it was like, well, we're protesting. Okay, whatever. Then there's just these regular guys that are on the street, and I couldn't help but notice this guy and his girlfriend, young African-American couple, and they had this look of glee, and I said, which are you? Are you a fan, or are you here to, basically deride and watch the guy go out in tar and feathers? And he's like, oh, we're here for the tar and feathers, he says with a big grin. And I'm just like, I realized that if they were literally putting this guy in a vat of hydrochloric acid, you would get cheers from the audience. That's the level of delusion that they've been sort of frenzied into. So, it is helpful to realize the depths of this. It's also helpful to, I just did a $3,000 hypnosis course and learning, I've always encouraged people to learn NLP just to know how they're being influenced by certain choices of words.
Very good point to point out, NLP, yeah.
Well, I mean, NLP is nothing special. I mean, for the most part, NLP is just a branding term that Richard Bandler used. But he was working with a linguist, so in order for him to, I guess, sell it to somebody that was a linguist by trade, he was trying to build, this linguist was trying to build on the idea that language is innate, and Noam Chomsky had worked on that and so forth. And so this mathematician that looked at this is just like, well, I kind of want to have a product to sell in the future. He kind of has that kind of voice. But yeah, I mean, most of the stuff that's in quote-unquote NLP is this repackaged hypnosis. Ericksonian hypnosis, the so-called Milton model is what they call it in NLP, when you're doing what looks like to other people Jedi mind tricks. When you say something like, well, I don't know what it is about me. I don't know what it is about working together with me that makes me feel more and more excited. But as that's taking place, I just want you to say that I don't know if you have any questions, but if you happen to have any questions that naturally rise as a result of a decision that's about to be made, please ask. Something like that embeds a whole lot of suppositions and things like that. In Jim Acosta's case, he doesn't really need it because the weight of the network is behind him. He can go ahead and suggest that Trump had supported neo-Nazis. Just by saying it, no one's going to sue his ass. They should. There should be a tidal wave of lawsuits every single time a reporter, starts saying some propaganda shit. The Smith Modernization Act that Obama signed into law allows, media organizations and the U.S. government to just blanket the airwaves with propaganda with impunity, and no one's able to really do anything about it. But they should at least know that they're being lied to. Another thing is that, I'm going to keep rambling if I just keep going, so I want everybody to have a chance to speak, or if anybody wants to, but I was going to say that I was in a punk music store in Washington, D.C. And it was fascinating that there was, sort of a bulletin board where local bands and people can talk about whatever they want to talk about. And one of them said, it was just a sign that said something like, make sure to mask up or something like that. And I'm like, you bunch of miserable sots used to be countercultural. You used to fight the man. So one of the things one of the ingredients of this whole thing that you've got to take mind of is the fact that they've completely co-opted counterculture and made it this whole, like, I'm going to dye my hair pink and have my hair, I'm going to look like I fell asleep on a hot plate, I'm going to make my hair whoosh on one side, I'm going to look all alternative, but my views are all going to be super statist, and they're going to be pushing this communist thing, and I'm going to be, making sure that when I'm in my 40s, yelling at an Alexa to do things for me, that I don't care if the government is snooping in on every single thing that that I'm saying, and how dare you for having a problem with that? They've basically made a youth movement of little enforcers, and you've got to counter that with something. You got to basically make fun of these suckers. They're ridiculous people.
They are. It's it's interesting, but like I said, they wouldn't be able to do this if if people didn't perceive them as some prestigious authority group. That's why all these woke people are like, yay, because they're like the big government and they're all on our side now. And they're actually not. They're just using them as like useful idiots. Kieran, anything to add?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I mean, if you think about the definition of punk, to be punk now is kind of doing what we're doing, kind of having this kind of conversation. To be punk is growing your own vegetables in your garden. That it's crazy that's what punk has become. And I've seen a picture of a young lady who's got some kind of anarchist shirt on, and yet she's sat there in a Starbucks, drinking a Starbucks on an Apple Mac laptop. Kind of really buying into the capitalist kind of society, dealing with all these corporations, yet she's wearing this anarchist t-shirt, and I don't think she know what that meant if it slapped her in the face. So,
what it tells you is this whole system just gobbles everything up. So
it's inverted,
one of the things when we go, it inverts everything too, but it gobbles everything up. It tries to make it its own, like a cheap commercial version of it. That's why you're growing your stuff and being out with your company, and you can bet someplace like Prime or Amazon in their thing, they'll be like, hey, let's have a community little chamber. Like they'll try to copy that in some perverse, retarded, excuse my language, but really ridiculous way. But it's so inauthentic. It's like, it's grotesque.
It's massive, and something that, sorry, I don't know that guy's name, but something that he brought up previous was, about how, these kind of corporations that are, whether, when they introduce mask mandates or whatever, whether they're doing that organically or whether they're doing it because they're being told they need to do it. It's very similar with the whole Pride thing. You see these we have Pride Month now. I don't know if that happens worldwide, but here we have Pride. So,
it's not Pride year.
Every big organisation, every big corporation kind of changes their social media profile picture to the Pride flag and all of this stuff. And yet, you'll see like that same organisation somewhere like Saudi Arabia on Twitter or on Facebook, and they haven't changed their flag. And so what does that tell them? Of course they haven't, because in that country it's illegal to be homosexual. So if they really wanted to stand up for these people, then the one place they would change their profile picture would be in that country.
Yeah.
So and all that happens is that these people, that they just become virtue signalers. And Christ, have we seen an influx of virtue signalers over the last few years, but that's all they're doing. It becomes meaningless. Sticking that as your profile picture becomes completely.
They'll take everything and they strip any meaning out of it and turn it into some kind of product on a shelf that's dead.
Yeah, and that's kind of how it is. The culture that we live in now, and the society that we live in is just that. This kind of shallow, virtue signaling, I'll just say what I think is the best thing to say because that means I won't get in trouble kind of society. And punk was all about the opposite of that. Punk was all about, standing on stage and singing anti-royalty songs like, the Sex Pistols did, for example. Mm-hmm. Could you imagine that now? it just wouldn't happen, And during COVID, I mean, who were the punks? The punks were Van Morrison, I believe, that released a song, and who else was there? Did I think maybe towards the end?
"God Save My Latte."
I'm sure towards the end, Eric Clapton came out with something because he had an adverse reaction to one of the vaccines, so he ended up kind of speaking out about it. But they were quickly shut down and quickly silenced. Yet again, music has always been a platform to and it's the same with comedy. There were no comedians kind of ripping into this. What's happened over the last 3 years, and any comedians that did were quickly cancelled and pulled down.
Yeah.
So
and the comedians, the late night shows we had here in America were it was so ridiculous. I hope they look back in 20 years and go, "Wow, I'm a loser for singing the COVID vaccination song like to everybody like they're 4 years old." I really hope that they live in shame for the rest of their lives.
Can I jump in again?
Yeah.
So I want to tie this up. We've been about an hour and a half here, and I don't want to keep everybody all night. I guess what would the advice is the technology that they have is obviously manipulating us, and I don't know, what's any last words, Kieran, on the sense of reality, anything about David Icke, anything you want to kind of let everybody know about how they're manipulating us?
I think really it's just firstly be aware that they are manipulating you. That's the first, half of the battle won, really. Because there are people that don't even know it. They live their life in blissful ignorance. Well, they're not even being ignorant because they just don't know. They're completely unaware. So being aware that you're being manipulated, being aware that you're being controlled, that there's a war for your mind, for your body. Once you're aware of that, once you're aware that you're in a game, then you can begin to play the game. And for me, the key is to get out of the game, to know that you're in the game in order to get out of it. And to have this kind of, as I've mentioned throughout, just start putting your energy towards other things that are still being non-compliant, that are still, fucking the system. There are better ways to do it than arguing with your neighbour because he has a different opinion to you. There are better ways to spend your life. You're going to lie on your deathbed and think, what did I do? Well, I'm really glad I argued with that one, Brexiteer back in 2020. I'm glad I argued with him. Are you going to do that on your deathbed, or are you going to lie there and think, for example, the guy I mentioned, I'm glad I started that forest school for all those children. I'm glad I started a community allotment to grow vegetables for my village. I'm glad I did all of that. That's, for me, is just better for your soul. So there's better ways to not comply than what the majority of the truther movement are doing at the moment, and realizing that you're being manipulated and then just stepping away from it.
Yeah, I want to say to people, we are always being manipulated, and I think the key is to keep your emotions at a mellow level. You don't want to get into the fear. You don't want to get into the anger where you're going to rush out and light something and go crazy. That's what they did here when they did the riots and stuff. They ignited rage and anger and race wars. You don't want to go there because that's where they want you. Because that's what they want. Control you.
That's what they want. Yeah. You're vibrating at an incredibly low frequency at that point. And as we've mentioned, that gives them reasons to bring in, a military-industrial complex. It gives them reasons to bring in stricter laws. It gives them reason to bring all that in. And you don't want to give them that reason.
That's right. I just want to answer all purposes. He left a comment about why resenting on me calling this show conspiracy folklore, because it's about facts. I call it folklore because folklore is the study. Folklore is usually based on facts. There's always an element of truth to folklore stories. And so we're getting to this sort of thing. Folklore is also for the people. It also includes traditions, customs, you know, what we wear, religions, what we believe. There's a whole element to it. It's not, folklore just isn't fiction. I didn't call it conspiracy fiction. Folklore envelops so many things that are really important to we the people. And I also collect folklore on my website, so that's why I called it that, just to let you know. We're going to tie it up. Thank you, Kieran, for coming on the Spaces. Can people find you, like your books or whatever, or is there some place someone can find you, or where can they get
sure.
your content?
I mean, like I said, my books are really about the paranormal, so if anyone's into that kind of thing, so they can find me on Facebook. Obviously, they will have my Twitter handle here, or X handle, or whatever it is. I don't really do Twitter. Maybe I should for going forward, but they can find me on Facebook, Kieran Woodhouse. If they email me, it's probably a good way, so kieran.woodhouse@gmail.com. Both my books are on Amazon, so again, if you just search for Kieran Woodhouse, you'll find my books on there. And yeah, like I say, I did release a documentary about a haunting I investigated. You can find that on YouTube, called A Haunting in Essex. And there'll be another one coming out at some point in the next 12 months or so. Like I say, we're in the very early stages. But yeah, connect with me and let's chat. It's always good.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for joining the Spaces. I have an archive of stuff. I haven't updated lately, but my website is melissadoneclectic.com. Everything's in my bio on Twitter, and all my links everywhere are on my website. So follow me on X. It's not Twitter anymore. It's X. Follow me on X and go to my website, and be sure to go on Amazon and search Kieran's name for his books. And hopefully next week I'll have another guest and we'll do another Spaces. Thanks everyone for joining. I haven't been doing this for long, so I appreciate people to come back and help me grow with the Spaces and have good conversations. All right. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
All right.